to the first lecture. This is the lecture for Chapter 1, Part 1, The Purpose of Research. So in this first part of the lecture, we're going to start by talking about what scientific research is and the purpose for it, why we do it, what it means, and really starting some definitions of research. So to start us off, let's go into a little bit of what we talk about when we are discussing research. And the first of those is what we call traditional knowledge. And traditional knowledge is a form of knowledge that we inherit from the culture that we grow up in. So, this is typically the knowledge that we have of whether or not you shake hands with someone when you're introduced to them. If you hug someone when you're introduced to them, do you make eye contact with people? Do you wait in line at the grocery store or do you budge in front of someone? This is an example of what we call traditional knowledge. It's the knowledge that we gain from the environment around us, the culture that we grow up in. We also have what's called authority. And authority is a form of knowledge that is believed to be true because it comes from a source of authority. So, a good example of this is most of us typically pay attention to the things that we hear from our teachers, from our parents, maybe our elders in our family, because when they tell us something, we see them as a person of authority, so we take in that type of knowledge from them. So, again, authority is another type of knowledge that we have. We also have what we call experiential knowledge, and this is the form of knowledge that we gain through experiences. So, things like whether or not you should say hello to someone when you're meeting them, or maybe it is, oh, I had a really difficult conversation with someone, and based on that experience, I know to keep my space from them. It's the things that you learn from trial and error in your life. Like, you probably learn pretty quickly if you have a bike with hand pedals, which brake you want to hit when you're going down a hill. And you learn that probably from experience of maybe clicking or using the wrong brake at one point. So, experiential knowledge is that knowledge that we gain from experience, but we also have what we call scientific knowledge. And scientific knowledge is really going to be the main focus of our work together in this class on research methods because scientific knowledge is a form of knowledge that's based on studies conducted by researchers, and it is the knowledge that we can trust because scientific knowledge is produced by systematic research. It is the information that has been tested over and over again, has been tested through reality, through knowledge, and is really supported as saying, this is true information, and we can say that because the people who generated this knowledge did so by following a specific set of rules, embodying specific skills, and following a specific framework that allowed them to analyze their results in a way that we can say, yes, this is information that can be trusted. And when we talk about research methods, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about this scientific knowledge. And in order for us to really get a full view of scientific knowledge, we have to talk about, again, where that knowledge comes from. So, we talk about scientific knowledge when it's new as coming from scientific researchers. So, this is what you think of when you're talking with Mark or Brad, and they're like, yep, we're running a study and we're looking at this thing related to cannabis or this thing related to alcohol. And that is scientific research. And from that scientific research, we gain scientific knowledge. And I briefly highlighted this already, but an important piece of scientific knowledge is that it is moving us closer to reality. So, scientific knowledge and reality are different in that mainly we talk about reality as being what we are experiencing in our world around us, and knowledge is everything that we know to be true. And we talk about these things being different because knowledge is what moves us closer to understanding reality, but by definition, we do not ever fully truly understand what reality is. In fact, our book provides this really cool sort of breakdown of what this means and how we can sort of display this is that Knowledge moves us closer to understanding reality, but we are not truly aware of everything that comes into and makes up reality at its completion. All of our knowledge is going to move us closer to that, but we're never going to fully understand all of reality. Why things are the way that they are, understanding things from every single perspective that's possible. We can move closer and closer from to that by gaining knowledge, scientific knowledge, experiential knowledge, whatever it is, but we can never fully achieve reality. But the fact that we are striving to understand reality from a better perspective is why we do the research that we do, why we're seeking scientific knowledge, because we have a deep desire to know what our reality is. And the final component of scientific research and why we conduct it is really how we generate research. An important part of scientific research and scientific knowledge comes from the generation of that research, which is going back into that specific set of rules and skills and framework that we use to analyze research. It is through that sort of logistical understanding of scientific knowledge that we truly get more information and we gain that scientific knowledge. So, this is sort of the definitions of knowledge, but how we get that knowledge is actually pretty complicated. And there are a couple of theorists who have developed different ways that we can use to understand knowledge. And the first of those is who we call Karl Popper. And Karl Popper developed a theory of knowledge that he calls falsifiability. And really, from Karl Popper's perspective, he says that we advance scientific knowledge by proving things wrong in our current understanding of skills. So, he would say that we all go into our world and we have some form of knowledge that is said to be true. And it is through that information of knowledge being purported as being true that we have sort of a base of knowledge. But the only way that we gain new information is by trying to prove that base of knowledge wrong or to falsify it. So, for example, you might have a researcher who comes out and says, I know for sure that if someone drinks two alcoholic beverages, they are going to be classified as drunk. And that is knowledge. That is something that they're purporting. They probably have research to support it because they're a researcher. The only way that we can gain new knowledge on that information is by someone coming out and saying, I conducted my own research and I found different results. So I can say that what you proposed is false or wrong, and I have empirical evidence to support that my information is true. And it is true systematically across different situations, across different people, and it has experience to support this new knowledge, this new information. And from that empirical evidence that goes against an original proposed information, we can say, all right, now we have falsified the original knowledge and we have created new information. We have established new knowledge by falsifying what we already know. So here's another example. Maybe you have someone who says, growing a vegetable garden is easy. That's a tentative theory that they have supported and says this is knowledge. Vegetable gardens are easy. Then you have someone who goes out and has empirical evidence, whether that is their own experience growing a vegetable garden or if that is surveying people who have their own gardens. And in that experience, in that empirical evidence, this person finds out that actually having a vegetable garden can be really hard work. You have to go out and you have to pull weeds and you have to monitor the vegetables and make sure they're getting enough water and enough sun, but not too much sun and not too much water, and it's time consuming. So, this empirical evidence falsifies this original tentative theory that vegetable gardens are easy, And based on that empirical evidence, a new tentative theory is created. And in this example, we would say vegetable gardens look easy, but building one is hard work. And that's how Karl Popper says we develop new knowledge by falsifying previous information and supporting that falsification with empirical evidence. So that's one theory of knowledge that we talk about in this course. But we also have another theory of knowledge proposed by Thomas Kuhn, and his is called the structure of scientific revolution. And from Thomas Kuhn's perspective, he says that we have this base of normal science. And he defines normal science as being the general rules, laws, and paradigms that are accepted as truths in our society. These are the things that do not aim to explore new ideas or build on scientific knowledge through experimentation or taking risks, but it's rather information that is accepted to be true and is knowledge, like a general rule or a law. It's just what we know. Then we also have what he calls a paradigm. And to Thomas Kuhn, a paradigm is an unchangeable pattern that we use over and over again. It's this widely accepted information within our scientific community. So, a good example of this is when we talk about a recipe. A paradigm is a form of a recipe, or a recipe is a form of a paradigm, I'm sorry, in that we have a recipe card that we probably follow for something, and we use the same steps every time. It's an unchangeable pattern that we use over and over again. We have widely accepted that this information works. That's a paradigm. We have normal science that says, here is this law or this rule, which is our recipe, like the specific steps in it. And the paradigm is the unchangeable pattern that we use over and over again to enact that normal science, in this case, our recipe. He also proposed that we have what he calls anomalies. And anomalies are things that do not fit into our paradigm of normal science. Typically, when we're talking about anomalies, these are things that happen once or twice that don't fit the commonly accepted pattern of our normal science. And according to Thomas Kuhn, these anomalies are sort of almost like one off. They happen maybe once or twice, they're really far apart, but they stand against the knowledge that we have. He also proposed that when we have these anomalies and they happen enough times, they form what he calls a crisis. And this crisis is an accumulation of those anomalies against any accepted truth of normal science. So when we experience a crisis in normal science, it no longer fits our reality anymore. It no longer fits what we know to be true about our normal new science. So this crisis then leads way to what he calls a revolution. And that revolution is what replaces our old paradigm with some new paradigm. So after a crisis occurs, we have a revolution that replaces our old paradigm with something new, and that new paradigm creates a paradigm shift. When the widely accepted paradigm encounters with so many anomalies that it leads to a crisis, it leads to this revolution, and we establish a new paradigm that becomes accepted and becomes normal new science. So, this paradigm shift is that shift after a revolution where we start to create a new paradigm that leads way to a new normal science. So, we can almost think about Thomas Kuhn's sort of perspective of knowledge in this cyclical pattern, where we have a normal science, we experience occasional anomalies, then enough anomalies that occur close enough together create a crisis. From that crisis, we have a revolution. From that revolution, we establish a paradigm shift, which gives us a new paradigm that leads to a new normal science. So I have a really interesting example for you from our good friend Sigmund Freud. So, Sigmund Freud had a normal science that he believed that childhood sexual abuse was a source of trauma for the women that he was treating in his clinic, in his office with psychoanalysis. He had these women who were coming in and were saying that they experienced childhood sexual abuse, and he believed that from those experiences, those women were experiencing trauma. That was a source of their trauma. That was his normal science. He started to experience anomalies though. One of Freud's clients started to express that she didn't want to believe that the abuse had happened. It was so severe that she wished it hadn't happened and she wanted to not believe that it was true. And initially, Freud thought this is just a one off. This is an anomaly. This is someone who just doesn't want this trauma to happen. But over time, Freud started to experience crises because multiple of his clients were having similar sentiments to that original client, saying, I wish the abuse didn't happen. And I want to believe that it didn't happen because it was so intense and there was so much going on, and I don't want to believe that it happened. And because he was hearing this so often and so close together, Freud started to have a revolution. He started to believe that these memories that his clients were coming in with, talking about this specific sexual abuse, could not have been real. If multiple of his clients are saying, I wish this hadn't happened, I don't want to believe that it happened, Freud created a revolution in his thought that said, no, these memories must not be real. And from that, he experienced a paradigm shift. Freud started to conclude that these memories of childhood sexual abuse weren't actually real, but rather they were fantasies that had seemed to have been real. They had almost become real to those people, but in reality, according to Freud, they were fantasies. And from that, he established a new paradigm that childhood memories of sexual abuse are fantasies of the unconscious and not reality. And that became Freud's normal science. So I know that this is a really silly example because this is actually one of Freud's primary problems in his theories is that he believed this to be true. But from Thomas Kuhn's perspective of scientific revolution, we can see how Freud got there. We can see how this sort of paradigm shift, this information, these crises that people experience lead to new normal science that then becomes part of how we operate in the world. So that is going to wrap up the first section of our Chapter 1 lecture. You can join us back in for Part 2 here in a minute.